The mission began before sunrise, when the jungle was still wrapped in darkness and every leaf held the night's moisture. Our four-man reconnaissance team slipped across the Cambodian border without a word. We had one assignment: confirm reports that a senior Khmer Rouge security force had established a new movement route somewhere deep inside the forests of Kampong Thom. If the intelligence proved correct, larger Vietnamese units would avoid walking into an ambush days later. I was the deputy scout, 23 years old, carrying more responsibility than confidence. In reconnaissance, silence mattered more than courage. One careless step could erase weeks of preparation. Our team leader, Wa, walked first. He had served longer than the rest of us and possessed an uncanny ability to read the jungle. He could tell whether a broken branch had snapped that morning or 2 days earlier. Behind him came me, then Ben, whose memory for terrain amazed everyone. He rarely spoke, but after walking a trail only once, he could sketch every stream, termite mound, and fallen tree from memory. Bringing up the rear was Lam, the youngest among us. During quiet moments, he talked about opening a small motorcycle repair shop after the war. Whenever he spoke about engines, his tired face somehow looked younger. Each of us carried little beyond what was necessary: a folded paper map sealed in waxed cloth, a compass hanging beneath our shirt, a dented canteen that had survived more drops than we cared to count, a hammock with a rain poncho tied tightly on top, several packets of dried rice, a rifle that felt heavier every mile. The jungle swallowed every sound. Only the steady drip of water from giant leaves, the distant cries of birds, and the soft crunch beneath our boots reminded us that the world was still moving. Around mid-morning, Wa suddenly froze. His left fist rose slowly into the air. We all stopped instantly. Nobody asked why. I lowered myself beside a thick tree root and waited. Wa crouched near a patch of dark soil. Without speaking, he pointed toward a circle of gray ash beneath a cluster of bamboo. A cooking fire. The ashes were no longer hot, but they were not cold either. Someone had left only hours earlier. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. That was how reconnaissance worked. Excitement clouded judgment. Calm kept you alive. Nearby, I noticed several footprints pressed into the damp earth. They were lighter than ours, made by sandals cut from old tires. The edges remained sharp, untouched by wind or rain. Whoever had passed through had traveled carefully, avoiding broken branches and exposed roots. "They're disciplined," I whispered. Wa nodded once. We continued moving at half our previous pace. Every few minutes we stopped to study the ground. Bent grass, fresh scratches on tree bark, tiny cuts where someone had cleared vines with a machete. The forest spoke quietly, and our job was to listen. By early afternoon, even the air felt heavy enough to breathe like water. Sweat soaked my uniform. Mosquitoes circled our faces without mercy, and I could already feel the familiar chills that warned another bout of malaria might not be far away. Then I saw something that made me motion for everyone to halt. Half hidden beneath a layer of wet leaves was a single footprint. It was much smaller than the others, yet it had sunk deeper into the soft earth than any boot should have. I stared at it for several seconds. Someone carrying a very heavy load had passed this way. Or someone had been carrying something, or someone they could not afford to lose. At that moment, none of us realized that following that single footprint would lead us straight toward the most dangerous encounter of our entire mission. We followed that small, deep footprint for nearly an hour without speaking. Wa moved first, low and slow, placing each step where the ground had already been touched by fallen leaves or roots. I stayed 5 paces behind him, watching both his hand signals and the jungle around us. Ben came after me, his eyes always measuring distance, marking every bend in the trail inside his head. Lam walked last, careful but still young enough to breathe a little too loudly when the slope rose. The forest in Kampong Thom was not empty. It only pretended to be. That was the first lesson any scout learned. The trees listened. The wet ground remembered. A careless man left his story everywhere: broken twigs, crushed moss, a heel mark beside a root, a vine cut too clean by a blade. Our job was to read that story before the enemy read ours. The tracks did not form a straight trail. Whoever made them knew how to move. Sometimes they stepped on stones. Sometimes they walked through dry leaves where prints would not show. Twice, the trail vanished completely, and we had to stop for long minutes, crouching in the damp heat while mosquitoes found our necks and wrists. Wah never rushed. He could wait over one bent blade of grass as if it were a page in a book. Ben leaned close to me once and whispered, "They're avoiding low ground." I looked ahead and saw what he meant. The natural path dipped toward a shallow streambed, but the marks curved away from it. That told us something important. Men carrying normal supplies might use water to hide their tracks. These men avoided it. Maybe they had something that could not get wet. Documents, a radio, ammunition, or a wounded man. Lamb swallowed hard when I told him to check behind us. He was from Tai Ben, a ricefield boy with thin shoulders and a stubborn heart. At night, when we were allowed to whisper, he talked about machines, motorcycles, pumps, old engines. He said after the war he would open a little repair shop near the market and never again sleep with a rifle across his chest. We used to laugh at him for dreaming so clearly in a place where most of us only thought about the next meal. That afternoon, nobody laughed. The air smelled of wet earth, old smoke, and rotting leaves. My shirt stuck to my back. Inside my pack, the dried rice felt like stones. My canteen, dented along one side, knocked softly against my hip until I wrapped it with a strip of cloth. Even a small sound could travel strangely under the trees. Then the footprints disappeared. Wah raised his hand again. We dropped to one knee. In front of us lay a wide patch of dry leaves. No print, no drag mark, no broken stem. For a moment, I thought we had lost them. That was when Ben pointed to the grass on our right. It was barely noticeable. A few thin blades had been brushed backward, against the direction of the wind. Not broken, not stepped on, just touched. Wah studied it and gave the smallest nod. They had turned. We shifted right, moving away from the easier ground and into thicker brush. The jungle closed around us. Darker now, the canopy blocking what little sun remained. Somewhere far off, a bird cried once, then stopped. That silence bothered me more than the sound. After another 50 meters, I saw a mark on a tree trunk, a shallow scrape. Fresh, made by metal or a hard buckle. Above it, a thin branch had been bent but not snapped. Whoever passed there had been careful, but not careful enough. Wah looked back at me. His face had changed. We were no longer following a loose patrol. We were following trained men. And from the way the trail tightened, from the way the jungle seemed to hold its breath ahead of us, I knew we were getting close to something they did not want anyone to find. By late afternoon, we reached a low ridge covered in thorny vines and thin trees with pale bark. Wah signaled for us to crawl the last 20 yards. No one argued when a man like Wah chose to put his belly in the dirt. It meant danger was close enough to smell. I eased myself forward, one elbow at a time. Damp soil pressed against my chest. Ants crawled across my sleeve. Somewhere above me, a branch creaked softly in the wind, and for a second I thought it was a footstep. Then the trees opened just enough for us to see below. At first, I saw only smoke. Not the careless smoke of a small cooking fire, but thin gray lines rising from several hidden pits. They had covered the flames well, feeding them with dry wood so the smoke would spread through the canopy instead of climbing straight into the sky. That told me we were not looking at a random patrol. Wah handed me the small field glasses. I lifted them slowly. The camp sat in a shallow bowl of forest, almost invisible unless a man came from the right angle. Hammocks were strung low beneath green ponchos. Ammunition boxes had been tucked under woven mats. A narrow footpath ran from the camp toward the northwest, then disappeared under bamboo. Near the center, two men sat beside a radio wrapped in canvas. I counted silently. One guard near the east edge. Two more by the cooking pits. Another pair moving along the tree line. Farther back, under a darker patch of shade, several armed men stood apart from the rest. Their uniforms were better kept. Their weapons were cleaner. One carried an AK with the sling wrapped tight around his wrist. They watched everyone, even their own people. Canvey. Guards, not ordinary fighters. I lowered the field glasses and felt my mouth go dry. Ben crawled close enough for me to whisper what I had seen. He did not react, but I saw his fingers press into the soil. Lamb stayed behind us, watching the rear, his face pale under a layer of dirt and sweat. Our original mission had been simple: confirm movement, mark trails, then withdraw before night. What lay below us changed everything. This was more than a route. It looked like a temporary command stop, maybe tied to the security force we had been warned about. If larger Vietnamese units moved through this area blind, they could be hit from 3 directions without ever knowing where the fire came from. Wah unfolded the map under his chest, careful not to let the paper crackle. I marked the camp with a pencil so short it was hard to hold. Ben whispered distances from memory. Streambed to the south. Burned stump behind us. Bamboo patch northwest. Dry ravine east. I wrote it all down. There are moments in reconnaissance when time stretches strangely. You are close enough to see another man's face, close enough to hear him cough, yet you must become part of the ground. You cannot hate loudly. You cannot fear loudly. You cannot even breathe like a normal person. Below us, one of the guards laughed. The sound felt wrong in that hidden camp. Lamb later told me that was the moment he stopped thinking about his repair shop and started thinking only about his mother's kitchen. War did that to young men. It took their big dreams first, then left them holding small memories for warmth. We watched until the light began to fade. Then came the first hard decision. Wah believed we should stay through the night. We need their supply route. He whispered, if we leave now, we bring back only half the truth. I knew he was right. I also knew the jungle after dark belonged to men who knew every trail better than we did. Still, none of us objected. We backed away from the ridge inch by inch and found a place to hide beneath tangled roots and wet leaves. No fire, no talking, no full meal, just a few grains of dried rice softened under the tongue and water sipped from a dented canteen. As darkness settled over Kampong Thom, the camp below grew quieter. But somewhere beyond it, in the northwest bamboo, we heard footsteps moving where no guard had been before. That night, we lay under a low tangle of roots with our ponchos pulled over us like pieces of the forest floor. Rain came after midnight, not hard, just enough to make every leaf shine and every movement dangerous. Water gathered along the edge of my collar and ran down my back. I did not wipe it away. A scout learned to let discomfort pass through him. Scratching, shifting, even breathing too sharply could give away a position. Wah was beside me, his eyes fixed toward the northwest bamboo. Ben lay near my boots, one hand resting on the map case under his chest. Lamb was behind us, facing the direction we had come from. Every hour, we changed the angle of our watch without speaking. Below the ridge, the hidden camp had gone almost silent. Only once in a while did we hear a cough, the soft scrape of a boot, or the click of metal against wood. The men down there knew discipline. That worried me more than noise would have. Near dawn, I began to feel the old chill. At first it was only a tremble in my fingers. Then it moved into my elbows and knees. Malaria had been following me for months, waiting for the right moment to remind me that the jungle fought on both sides. I clenched my jaw and pressed my palms into the mud. Fever was a private matter. The mission could not stop because one man was cold. When the sky turned gray behind the trees, Wah signaled that we would shift position. We had seen enough of the main camp, but not enough of its supply route. The movement we heard in the bamboo during the night had changed the shape of the mission. If men were coming in from the northwest, then that trail might lead to storage, a radio point, or another guard post. The problem was where to move. Wah wanted to circle east, down through the dry ravine Ben had marked earlier. It was longer, but safer. I studied the ground and disagreed. The east ravine looked too open. If the enemy had even one hidden listener there, we would have no cover. I pointed west, toward a strip of thick brush where the trees grew close together. We can pass behind the bamboo, I whispered. Shorter, less exposure. Wah looked at me for a long time. In a normal unit, a soldier might argue with rank. In reconnaissance, a man argued with signs. I showed him what I saw. No fresh cuts on the vines. No broken leaves. No boot marks in the soft patches. The west side looked untouched. Wah finally nodded. That was my mistake. We moved after the camp's morning activity began, using their own noise to hide ours. Smoke rose again from covered cooking pits. Someone chopped wood with careful, muffled strokes. A guard muttered something we could not understand. We slipped backward first, then curved west in a slow half-circle. For the first 30 yards, everything seemed right. Then Ben stopped. He touched the ground and lifted 2 fingers. A print. Not old. I lowered myself beside him. The mark was shallow, made by the edge of a sandal, almost hidden beneath fallen leaves. Whoever left it had stepped sideways, not forward. A sentry's step. A man standing watch, shifting weight. My stomach tightened. We had not found an empty route. We had entered a hidden patrol line. Hoa's face hardened, but he did not blame me. That almost made it worse. We froze where we were. 4 men inside a wall of wet green brush, while the forest slowly woke around us. A gibbon cried somewhere far away. Insects buzzed over the mud. My fever chill returned, crawling up my spine. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a bird call. 3 short notes. Too even, too clean. Hoa's hand closed slowly around his rifle. A second bird call answered from our left. At that moment, I understood that the jungle was no longer only being watched by us. It was watching us back. The 3-note bird call hung in the wet air like a wire pulled tight. None of us moved. In the jungle, real birds made mistakes. They broke rhythm, shifted pitch, answered too soon or too late. This sound had none of that. It was neat, even, deliberate. A signal passed from one man to another. Wah lowered his hand slowly, palm flat. Stay down. I pressed my chest into the mud and felt my heartbeat against the ground. The fever chill had not left me, but fear steadied my hands. Strange thing about fear. Too much of it can paralyze a man. But just enough can sharpen every sense until even the ants crawling under your sleeve seem loud. A twig snapped ahead. Then another, farther left. They were closing the line. We had been exposed in the forests of Kampong Thom, not by a shout, not by a gunshot, not by some dramatic mistake, but by one wrong judgment about an empty patch of jungle. That is how things often happened in reconnaissance. A man did not fail all at once. He failed by inches. Wah looked at me once. There was no anger in his eyes, only calculation. He pointed 2 fingers toward the ground, then drew them back toward his chest. We would withdraw. Quietly, if the forest allowed it. Ben slid the map case from under his shirt and pushed it into my hand. I shook my head, but he held my wrist hard. His meaning was clear. If we scattered, one man had to carry the report. The camp location, the guard line, the Northwest Trail. All of it mattered more than pride. Lamb was behind us, pale and sweating. His lips moved without sound. Maybe he was counting. Maybe he was praying in the plain human way men do when they are too scared to use words. We backed away an inch at a time. Then the left side of the brush exploded. Not with heavy fire, but with a sudden rush of bodies through wet leaves. A voice barked in Khmer. Another answered. I saw movement, dark uniforms, low shapes, weapons held close. These were not careless fighters. These were the Canvey of Pol Pot, men trained to guard leaders and kill quietly. Wah fired first. One short burst. The sound tore the jungle open. After that, everything happened too fast and too slowly at the same time. Leaves shattered above us. Dirt kicked up near my elbow. Ben grabbed Lamb by the collar and dragged him behind a fallen trunk. I fired toward muzzle flashes I could barely see, then rolled behind a root thick as a buffalo's neck. The enemy tried to push from 3 sides. They did not waste ammunition. That frightened me. Men who sprayed bullets blindly could be fooled. Men who fired only when they saw movement were harder to escape. Wah shouted only once, north. We broke from the brush and ran low, slipping over wet roots, ducking under vines. The map case slapped against my ribs beneath my shirt. My canteen banged once against a tree, loud enough to make me curse under my breath. Then, from ahead, came a different sound. A soft whistle. 2 quick notes. Vietnamese. I nearly fired before I recognized the signal. 6 men rose from the shadowed slope like pieces of the forest itself. Their faces were blackened with mud. Their packs were tight. Their weapons were ready. Dak Kong. Vietnamese sappers operating deep in the same area, probably watching another target tied to the camp below. Their leader, a lean man with sharp cheekbones, looked at Wah for less than a second and understood enough. Your rear is cut, he whispered. Follow the creek bed. We'll hold them off. Wah hesitated. So did I. A scout's duty was to avoid contact. A sapper's duty was different. But in that moment, the mission, the map, and our lives became tied to those 6 men. Behind us, the Canvey were already moving again. And the forest of Kampong Thom, which had hidden us for 2 days, suddenly seemed to have no hiding place left. The sapper leader did not raise his voice. He only pointed toward the creek bed and said again, "Move." That calmness stayed with me for the rest of my life. Bullets were cutting through leaves behind us. The Canvey were closing fast. Yet those 6 men stood as if they had been waiting in that wet forest all morning for this exact moment. Wah grabbed my sleeve and pulled me forward. We dropped into the shallow creek bed one by one. There was almost no water, only black mud, slick stones, and roots twisted across the bottom like old ropes. Ben went first to mark the line. I followed with the map case pressed tight under my shirt. Lamb came behind me, breathing hard. Wah stayed last, limping now, though I did not notice the blood on his calf until later. Behind us, the 6 Dak Kong opened fire in short, careful bursts. Not wildfire, not panic fire. They fired, shifted, disappeared, and fired again from another angle. It made them sound like more men than they were. The forest amplified everything, the crack of rifles, the slap of branches, the dull thump of bodies hitting wet ground. But even in that noise, I could tell the sappers were fighting with discipline. We moved bent double along the creek. Every scout knows that running blindly is just another way of dying. Ben kept us from that. He remembered the map inside his head, the ridge behind us, the bamboo to the northwest, the dry ravine east, the streambed bending south. Twice he stopped us with one raised hand, then shifted us around soft patches that would have held our footprints like wet clay. Lamb slipped once and nearly fell. I caught him by the back of his web belt. His face was gray, his eyes wide like a boy waking from a bad dream. He had lost one sandal in the mud and did not even know it. I wanted to tell him to breathe slower, to save strength, but words felt dangerous. I only squeezed his shoulder and pushed him forward. A burst of fire came from our right. Too close. Wah turned and fired toward the sound. Then stumbled. This time I saw his leg buckle. Ben reached for him, but Wah slapped his hand away and pointed at me. "Keep the report moving," he hissed. That was the law of reconnaissance. A man could be wounded. A man could be left behind for a moment. But the information had to reach our lines. The camp, the guard route, the hidden patrol line. Those notes might save a whole company from walking into a trap. Still, laws written in training felt different when the man bleeding behind you had shared dried rice from his own pocket the night before. We dragged Wah anyway. Not far, just enough to get him behind a fallen tree where the creek bent under a wall of ferns. I tore a strip from my scarf and wrapped his calf tight. He did not groan, but sweat ran down his face in cold lines. Behind us, the sappers changed position again. One of them shouted something short in Vietnamese. Another answered with a laugh, one quick, hard laugh that sounded almost angry. Then the firing shifted farther left, pulling the convoy away from our trail. They were buying us space with their own bodies. I knew it then, and I hated knowing it. For a few minutes, the jungle gave us a narrow pocket of silence. We crouched under the ferns, listening. Rainwater dripped from the leaves onto Hoa's boot. Lam held his rifle across his chest with both hands. Trembling, Ben stared back the way we had come, his face empty, as if he were carving every sound into memory. Then a low whistle came from behind us. The sapper leader appeared between two trees, mud across half his face. Only 4 men were with him now. He looked at Hoa's leg, then at me. "Can he walk?" Wah answered before I could. "I can." The sapper nodded, but his eyes moved past us into the darker trees. "Then go faster," he said. "They've found the creek." Wah said he could walk, but every step cost him. We moved through the creek bed in a broken line, no longer as clean as a reconnaissance team should have been. Ben led us by memory, choosing stones instead of mud, roots instead of open ground. I stayed close behind him, one hand pressed against the map case under my shirt. Lam helped Wah for a while, letting the older man lean on his shoulder. The 4 sappers moved behind us now. They did not bunch together. One stayed near the creek bend. Another slipped along the higher bank. 2 others vanished and reappeared through the trees like shadows with rifles. Their leader kept close enough to guide us, but far enough to turn and fight if the convoy broke through. Then the forest went quiet. Too quiet. No rifle shots, no voices, no bird calls, only rainwater dripping from the leaves. That silence scared me more than the firing. Wah leaned against a tree and bit down on his sleeve while I tightened the cloth around his calf. The bleeding had slowed, but his face had the gray look of a man holding himself together by will alone. "We can't stop," he whispered. "I know." He looked at my chest, where the map case lay hidden. "That has to get back." I knew that too. Every line inside that case mattered. The command camp, the hidden patrol route, the northwest supply trail, the guard positions. If our battalion moved without that information, more men would die than the 4 of us standing in that creek bed. Then Lam disappeared. At first, I thought he had only stepped behind a tree to help cover our rear. A few seconds passed, then a few more. I turned and saw only wet brush, a fallen branch, and his single bare footprint in the mud where he had lost his sandal earlier. My stomach dropped. "Lam," I whispered. No answer. Ben saw my face and understood. His eyes moved to the map case, then toward the brush. He did not say what both of us were thinking. The mission or the boy? That is the kind of choice war likes to hand a man and then make him live with for the rest of his life. Wah heard us and grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak but fierce. "Go," he said. "You take the report. Ben can guide you." I looked back into the wet trees. Lam was 19, maybe 20, Old enough to carry a rifle. Young enough to talk about a motorcycle repair shop as if peace were waiting just beyond the next hill. He had shared his last pinch of salt with me 2 nights earlier because my fever made the dried rice taste like dust. Training said I should leave him. Duty said I should keep moving. But duty is a heavy word when it is spoken over another man's life. I pulled the map case from under my shirt and shoved it into Ben's hands. He stared at me. "Take Wa," I whispered. "Get this out." Ben shook his head once. I pushed the case harder against his chest. "You know the ground better than me. If anyone can lead him back, it's you." The sapper leader appeared beside us. Silent as rain, he looked from me to Ben, then toward the brush where Lamb had vanished. "I'll give you 5 minutes," he said. 5 minutes. In the jungle, that could mean a life, or it could mean nothing. I checked my rifle, then crawled back along the bank, keeping low beneath the ferns. Every few feet, I paused and listened. The mud held Lamb's trail poorly, but I found one scuffed root, then a bent leaf, then a smear of blood on a thorn. Not much. Enough. Behind me, Ben and Wa began moving again with the report. Ahead, the forest darkened. Then I heard it. A voice, barely more than breath. Brother. Lamb was alive. And from somewhere beyond him, another twig snapped. Lamb was curled behind a fallen tree, one hand clamped over his thigh. I reached him on my stomach, dragging myself through wet leaves and thorny vines. His face was streaked with mud, and his lips had gone white. The blood on the thorn I had seen was his, but the wound was not as bad as I feared. A splinter of wood, kicked up by gunfire, had cut deep along the side of his leg. Pain had dropped him, not the enemy. "Can you move?" I whispered. He nodded, but his eyes told me he was not sure. Another twig snapped ahead. I flattened beside him and raised my rifle. Through a screen of leaves, I saw a shape move between 2 trees. Then another. The Kanbei were searching carefully now. No shouting, no rush, just slow, patient men reading the same forest we had been reading since the mission began. That frightened me most. I pressed my mouth close to Lamb's ear. No sound, not even if it hurts. He nodded again. I wrapped his leg with the last strip of cloth I had, then pulled him backward inch by inch. He bit into his own sleeve to keep from crying out. I could feel his body shaking through the wet fabric of his uniform. 5 minutes had already passed. Maybe more. Somewhere behind us, the sapper leader fired 2 short bursts. The sound pulled the searcher's attention away for a moment. I used that moment to get Lamb to his knees. We did not run. Running would have broken branches, splashed mud, and left a trail even a child could follow. We moved like wounded animals, slow and low, using the creek noise and the dripping rain to hide the small sounds we could not avoid. At the bend, I found the first sign Ben had left for us. 3 small stones stacked beside a root. Not obvious, not natural either. Ben had done what only a good scout would think to do. He was leading us without waiting, marking a path that could be seen by friends and ignored by enemies. A little farther on, he had bent a fern stem toward the south. After that, a slash no longer than a fingernail marked the soft bark of a young tree. Those marks pulled us through the jungle like a thin thread. Lamb leaned on me harder with every step. His breath came hot against my shoulder. I wanted to tell him about his repair shop, about the tools he would one day hang on a clean wall, about the smell of oil instead of wet earth and blood, but words were too expensive then. Behind us, the firing grew scattered, then farther away, then closer again. The sappers were still moving, still buying time, still making the enemy guess. I could not see them, but I felt their presence in every chance we were given. Near dusk, we reached a stretch of bamboo so thick the light turned green. There, the creek split into 2 shallow lines. For a moment I did not know which way Ben had gone. Then Lamb touched my arm and pointed down. A partial footprint in mud. Bare toes. His own lost sandal had saved us. Ben had seen it earlier and copied the sign, pressing his own toes into the mud at the split to tell us which path to take. It was such a small thing, almost foolish, but in that hour it felt like a hand reaching back. We followed the left branch. The ground rose after another 100 yards. I smelled crushed grass and old smoke, then saw Wah beneath a screen of leaves, his rifle across his knees. Ben was beside him, pale with relief but still silent. He took Lamb from me without a word. For a while, none of us spoke, we only listened to the forest darken. Far behind us, one final burst of gunfire cracked through Kampong Thom. Then nothing. No voices, no whistles, no footsteps. Only the rain, the insects, and the heavy silence of men who understood that others might not be coming back. We did not reach our lines until the next morning. By then, Wah was half-conscious, Lamb was limping on a leg wrapped in dirty cloth, and I could no longer tell whether the shaking in my body came from fever or exhaustion. Ben led us through the last stretch by memory alone. He had folded the map case under his shirt, close to his skin, as if body heat could protect the information inside. When we finally saw the first Vietnamese sentry, no one cheered. We only stopped. For a few seconds, I stood there under the pale morning light and listened to ordinary sounds, men boiling water, someone coughing, a pot lid clattering softly. After 2 days in the forest of Kampong Thom, those simple noises felt strange, almost peaceful. Then my knees gave out. They took Wah to the aid station first. He tried to argue, still asking whether the report had been delivered. The medic told him to shut up and lie down. Lamb sat beside a tree while another medic cleaned the cut on his leg. He stared at the ground the whole time. The boy who once talked about engines in a repair shop had gone quiet in a way I did not know how to fix. Ben handed the map case to the battalion intelligence officer. The paper inside was damp at the corners but still readable. My pencil marks had blurred in places. So Ben and I gave the report together. We described the hidden camp, the cupboard cooking pits, the radio position, the guard line, the northwest supply trail, and the false open western route that had nearly trapped us. Ben corrected distances from memory. I added what I had seen through the field glasses. The officer listened without interrupting. Only when we finished did he look down at the map for a long time. "This changes the movement plan," he said quietly. That was all. No speech, no medals, no dramatic moment. Just a sentence. But I understood what it meant. A column that might have gone through that killing ground would now be turned away. Men who would never know our names might live because of muddy footprints, bent grass, and a few pencil lines carried under a torn shirt. Still, that knowledge did not make me feel proud at first. It made me tired. Later that day, we heard that a Vietnamese sapper element had returned from the same forest. Not 6 men, not even 4. 2. The leader was among them. His left arm was bandaged, and his face looked older than it had the day before. He came to the aid station near sunset. I was sitting outside with a blanket around my shoulders, sweating through another fever chill. He did not speak much. He only asked, "The report got through?" I nodded. He looked toward the tree line, where the jungle stood dark beyond the camp. "Then it was worth it," he said. I wanted to believe him completely. But war never lets a man keep simple answers. If something is worth it, why does it still hurt to remember? If a mission saves lives, why do the faces of the men who did not return come back more clearly than any success? That night, Wah slept with his wounded leg raised on a rolled blanket. Lamb finally spoke, asking whether a man could still repair motorcycles with one good leg. Ben told him yes, as long as he still had both hands and a stubborn head. We laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes laughter was the only way to prove we had not been swallowed whole. Before dawn, Ben sat beside me and placed something in my palm. It was my small compass, scratched along one edge. I had not even realized I had lost it during the withdrawal. Found it near the creek bend, he said. I closed my fingers around it. The needle still moved. After everything, the mud, the gunfire, the wrong turn, the men left in the forest, it still searched for north. I still have that compass. It sits today in a small wooden drawer beside my bed, wrapped in an old piece of green cloth that used to be part of my rain poncho. The glass is scratched, one corner of the brass case is dented. If I hold it close to the light, I can still see a thin line across the cover where it struck a stone somewhere in that creek bed in Kampong Thom. The needle still moves. Not smoothly. Not like it did when I was young, but it moves. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and rain taps against the roof, I take it out and place it in my palm. Then the years fall away. I am no longer an old man with stiff knees and gray hair. I am back under that wet canopy, smelling mud, smoke, and crushed leaves. I hear the insects. I feel the weight of dried rice in my pack, the pull of a dented canteen at my hip, the cold bite of fever in my bones. I see Wah lying on a rolled blanket, angry at his own wounded leg because it slowed the mission. He survived, but he never walked quite the same after that. For years, whenever we met, he would say the scar only hurt when the weather changed. Then he would smile as if weather in Vietnam did not change every other hour. I remember Ben most clearly in silence. He was never a man of many words. After the war, he went back to farming. Once, he sent me a letter with a hand-drawn map to his house. So detailed that it marked a crooked mango tree, a broken well, and the place where the road turned muddy after rain. I laughed when I saw it. A scout stays a scout, even in peace. Lam did open his repair shop. Not right away. The wound in his leg healed slowly, and the war left other marks no medic could bandage. But years later, I visited him. His shop smelled of oil, metal, and hot rubber. Wrenches hung on the wall in perfect order. He walked with a slight limp, but his hands were quick, confident, alive. When I teased him about losing a sandal in Kampong Thom, he shook his head and said, "That sandal saved us." And maybe it did. As for the 6 Dak Kong who stepped out of the trees that day, I never learned all their names. I knew only the leader's face, his calm voice, and the way he asked whether the report had gotten through before asking about his own men. 2 came back from that forest. 4 remained somewhere behind us, swallowed by rain, bamboo, and gun smoke. War remembers people unevenly. Some names are written down. Some are spoken at ceremonies. Some exist only in the memory of another soldier who happened to survive. That has troubled me more with age. The older I get, the more I understand that survival is not always a reward. Sometimes it is an assignment. You carry what others no longer can. The report from that mission changed a movement plan. Men were spared an ambush. A hidden camp of Pon Pot Canvey was later avoided, then struck from a better direction. On paper, that was success. But when I think of Kampong Thom, I do not think first of success. I think of Hoa's hand gripping my wrist, Ben stacking 3 stones beside a root, Lam whispering, "Brother," from the dark brush, the sapper leader giving me 5 minutes he could not afford. And I think of that final silence after the last burst of gunfire. The forest has probably grown over every footprint we left. The creek bed has changed shape. The bamboo that hid us may have died and returned many times. But there are paths that remain inside a man long after the jungle erases them. When I close the compass, I always do it gently. Not because it is fragile. Because inside that small, scratched thing is the direction back to men I can no longer find. Except in memory.